students. I hope you can see and hear me well. Today we're going to cover another lecture brief, which is going to be on a course called Risks in the Service Sector. And I'm the lecturer, Ilijan Sektor-лекция2-англ. So today we're going to have a usual lecture outline. So at the beginning we're going to have an overview of the previous lecture. Then we're going to start a new lecture, which is going to be a lecture of the week 2, which is called Fundamentals of the Concept of Risk. And at the end of the lecture, I'm going to give you an assignment. Previous lecture, as you know, was the first lecture. And during that lecture, we have covered key things. So basically, we had an introduction to the course outline. We have talked about the purpose of the discipline, its objectives. We covered the structure of the discipline. We talked about all the 15 lectures that are going to be taught during the course. And we have mentioned that we're going to and planning to have 2 midterms. And at the end, we are going to have a final exam. In between, we have mentioned and discussed the terms such as uncertainty, hazard, risk, and the others. And at the end of the lecture, we talked about assignments and grading. We talked about self-study, and we've mentioned how we're planning to grade you. So let's start the lecture of the current week, week 2. Again, fundamentals of the concept of risk. So as we all know, all the business endeavors and business itself is all about opportunity and risk. There is no opportunity without a risk, because we know that the economy is a science that studies human interaction between people, interaction between groups of people, and using like limited resources and allocating them in order to produce goods to fulfill people's needs. And I mean, we do all these things under the context of limited resources. So we have to take one resource and allocate it somewhere. We have factors of production, and all these things need us to make some decisions that, of course, have some level of risk inside. So business is always about opportunity and a risk. So what is risk? I mean, from the term risk, we can define it in a different way. In some places, risk can be understood as an hazard. Risk can be understood as a danger. Risk can be a warning. Risk can be something like unexpected, uncertain, and etc. So usually we have many ideas about that. During the lecture we have, during the previous lecture we have discussed it. So today it's time to mention the current and the actual kind of definition of this term. Before we do that, let's talk about the business environment and where the risks take place. We're not going to be talking just about general risks. We're going to talk about risks that occur in business endeavors while we are working, and especially we're going to focus on the service sector. So risks come, I mean, of course, risks can be like external and internal risks, but I mean, we're going to start from external risks, and in a different lecture, we're going to cover internal risks. So from marketing, we know that we have different layers of environment of an organization. We have internal environment, we have external environment. External environment is usually divided into 2. So macro-external environment and micro-external environment. And I mean, if what is in the internal environment can be managed by us directly, the external environment is usually something that cannot be managed by us. So I mean, these things happen in there and they affect us. And these, I mean, like happenings, we call them events. They can be expected and unexpected. They can be like out of uncertainty, and they can be an uncertain events, so we don't know what is going to be their impact. They can be sudden and extreme. So those, like events should be evaluated and should be understood their impact. So impacts can be positive and negative. Positive impacts are called opportunities, and negative impacts are called threats. We know that from the SWOT analysis, the last term where, like, I mean, or you're going to, yeah, you have covered marketing. Yeah, so we know that there is a SWOT analysis, which consists of strengths and weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. We know that strengths and weaknesses are about internal environment, and opportunity and threats are about external environment. So know that, and now let's define the term risk. Risk is the expression of likelihood and impact of an uncertain, sudden, and extreme event. Here, I highlighted the three main concepts that should be included whenever we define a risk, and they are likelihood, probability, impact, basically what is going to be the outcome, yeah, and event. This is something that happens. That is why the risk is made of an event. Risk is, requires a likelihood, yeah, and risk is an impact. So whenever we have these three things together, we say that we have a risk. So there should be event, something should happen, and it should be a negative, to be a risk. Likelihood, like the probability of something happening, that event, and impact. Impact, is usually an undesired effect or significant loss when it comes to income or profit. And now let's talk about uncertainty. Uncertainty usually is about something that was not measured, was not evaluated. So this is something that can happen and can cause something. It can be a positive and it can be a negative. That is why there is uncertain event, uncertain probability, and uncertain impact. So we don't know if it is a risk. Yeah, so usually it is not like this. Yeah, we know that there can be a negative effect, there can be a probability, so it can happen, and it can cause a significant loss. In this case, we are going to say that it is a risk which was calculated. Yeah, but that's going to be a bit later in the lecture. So let's define the term uncertainty. Uncertainty refers to epistemic, yeah, which is knowledge situations involving imperfect or unknown information. So as you can see, we don't know what can happen, we don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know how it's going to impact us. So this is the situation where everything is uncertain. In some cases, yeah, we can have some information, so we can expect that something may happen. We don't know when it may happen. Yeah, so maybe tomorrow, maybe in 10 years time, etc. And we are not so much certain about the impact. So maybe it's going to help our business, or it's going to cause some significant losses. So it's going to be kind of a threat. So how uncertainty can turn into a risk or opportunity? It can turn by measuring it. So we study, we gather information, and as soon as we have enough information, to classify it, we call the situation like an opportunity for us or a risk. If we call it a risk, so it is something that can cause an undesired effect or significant loss. We call it a risk. Now we need to measure it. Yeah. To what extent the loss is going to be, when it can be, and how negative it is. Yeah. So we're going to measure it and understand the probability and understand the impact. The opportunity can be studied too, but that's going to be a topic of a different course. Now let's talk about thinking. Yeah, risk is thinking, or psychology of risk. Psychology of risk is the study and understanding of the mental processes underlying our responses to risky situations. So basically, I mean, the management and basically the economics is mostly about, I mean, not mostly of course, but it is about human interaction and human behavior. And the science that studies it is psychology. That is why, I mean, we cannot talk about risky thinking, risk management without covering the psychology. So when it comes to the mental processes regarding the risk, basically the psychology of risk, we talk about recognition as a process, we talk about judgment as a process, and we talk about decision making as a process. So recognition is like the mental process of recognizing an uncertain situation, gathering information, and then judging it. Judgment is going to be a different process. So we have different variables, we have different criteria, and we judge according to them and understand that, okay, this is a risky situation, and we maybe have to do something. We judge it and we say, okay, this is something big, something huge, and we have to do something about it. So we should act upon it. And it in its turn brings another mental process which is called decision or decision-making process. In management, we have different like ways, and styles of making decision. They can be like a tree. They can be about like collective decision-making, etc. And we're going to discuss it maybe later. But usually this is something that is covered in management. Like risk management and in general management is covered in a general way. When it comes to like entrepreneurship, business, management, all the risks that are taken, are called calculated risks. Why? Because I mean, as soon as we have a risk, so we have some information. It is not an uncertainty anymore. We measure it. We know the probability. We know what kind of impact it can cause. Then we further collect and conduct necessary research, try to understand what our decisions can make. They may they minimize the risk, or vice versa. They may turn that small risk into a severe one. So we do some due diligence. So we conduct research, we conduct necessary investigation, and then we kind of have a calculated risk. So we know what can every single decision bring. Then we do an informed decision that, of course, should minimize the risk. And this is in its turn is about risk management. So risk management is a process of identifying, assessing, and controlling threats to organizations' capital and earnings. So capital is about the assets of organization that can be like that can have huge liquidity and less liquidity, and of course earnings, they are about income and profit of the organization. Basically, we're going to cover these things later on in different lectures, within this course. So basically, this is briefly what we were covering and we were supposed to cover during the second week. And now let me give you your assignment. So you're going to have two assignments for this week. The first one is to choose a service sector organization and describe its external environment and list a number of threats and opportunities. So you need to choose an organization. Hopefully you're going to choose an organization in the field of hospitality, describe its environment, internal and external, but focus on the external one, and list a number of threats. Means some threats can be natural, and other. I'm not going to go into detail, and we're going to talk about that in future when we'll be describing different types of risks and threats. But now I'd like you to start digging into it, so thinking and step by step understanding the concept and seeing what we can do about these threats. Then, of course, try to categorize the listed threats and think about ways of minimizing it. So this is going to be something that we're going to do like using our intuition. We're going to use and hope that you're going to use common sense. Usually management and whatever we do is about common sense. We don't should overcomplicate things. Of course, when we should use different techniques and different methods, but that is going to be something that will require studying. And this is the reason we have this course. Okay, thank you for participating. This is the end of the lecture 2. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Have a nice day and goodbye.